Are we rolling? Okay, I was just talking about. I thought I'd just start by talking about violence. That's what we were talking. A portrayal of violence, and this was something I learned when I read Shogun, James Clavell's novel. There's, of course, you can't write about Japan without writing about people getting chopped up by samurai and all kinds of good stuff like that, blown up by ninja, and I noticed that he never went into any of the gory details. He simply says that the sword came down, the head came off, and then he goes right on with the scene, whatever else is happening. He doesn't dwell on the blood flowing and the blood on the sword, and the sword have to be wiped off. And so that's sort of one thing I've tried. In other words, I've tried to avoid in my books with sort of what I would call the pornography of violence, where when you describe a violent action, you really get into it. You really try to get the reader to practically throw up or whatever, That's which some writers do. So, do people have anything they'd like to ask? Or do you want me to?
Just a quick comment. You know,
Sure.
the Illuminatus is now it's official. It's a college course at Oberlin. It's called.
No kidding.
It's experimental college, but it's called Everything You Know Is Wrong. And the text is the Illuminatus, which they'll read for the whole semester.
Oh, that's fantastic. Did you know that?
No, that's
Oberlin
in
College.
Ohio here, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very high. I mean, it's considered to be a very top,
Where is it?
small liberal arts college.
Where is it?
In Oberlin.
Oberlin is near Cleveland.
Yeah, other side of Cleveland from here.
It seems to me I knew somebody who taught there back in the early '60s.
You know, it's. I have been told. I don't know if this is. I can't know if this is true, and Bob Wilson, I think, can't know if it's true either. That we have very similar sounding voices. I know I don't sound anything like him to me in my own ears, but that's what people say. And I was just thinking that on this tape, people probably, if that is true, people won't know which of us is talking. But we think we should say for the record that this is Bob Shea talking, and Bob Wilson is sitting right across from me. And sometimes if you hear a voice that sounds like me but says something that I wouldn't say, but those who know me well would know I wouldn't say, it's probably Bob Wilson. All Bobs, in any case. Yeah. And we have the great smiling Bob head behind us here. I wonder if we should we be happy or not about that Illuminatus has made it into the canon.
I like it.
You like the canon, or you like Illuminatus?
I like the idea that at least one college is teaching it. I heard of another that was teaching it several years ago, but that was very far out, experimental, and unaccredited.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that it has been used as there was a contemporary novel course at Durham taught by a woman named Bernadette Bosky, who was an assistant teacher at Duke University, and she used it as one of a number of books. So it has been taught, but not as the central book. Shall I start with I was born?
I have a question. In your historical novels, how much historical research do you do before you even quote get started, or are you started as you're doing your research?
I usually, I wouldn't I wouldn't really be inspired to write about a particular period unless I already had some notion that it was, I knew enough about it to know that it was a kind of an interesting period of history, and I'd like to do something about it. So normally I already have a little stuff that I know about. For instance, the first historical novel I did was Shike, which was set in medieval Japan. And I had kind of gotten interested in Asian history as a small boy, I guess when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And we had a set of volumes of world history in my house that my father had acquired. And I remember reading and rereading and rereading the histories of Japan and China. For some reason, they were more interesting to me than some of the histories of some of the other countries. So there was that kind of, and that interest always kind of stayed with me. So there's kind of a sort of global interest in the background, and then I usually have a couple of books around the house that I might consult. At some point, I have to have you need an idea for a story. With All Things Are Lights, my second novel, I had the idea wasn't really much of an idea. The idea was just, gee, the 13th century in Europe was an interesting time. I'd like to write a book about the 13th century in Europe. But then I needed characters, I needed people with a problem and so on. And so I had to do, and I remember doing quite a bit of research into things going on in the 13th century before I finally settled on a particular set of events that I thought I could wrap my fictitious characters around. So I generally start writing without having done a whole lot of research. I just plunge right in and try to find out what I need to know as I go along, or correct myself later on if I'm wrong about something.
I was thinking. I have a general objection to the gory violence that's so popular these days, and yet I make exceptions, and I try to figure out why I make exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on my belief in the integrity of the director. Like Bonnie and Clyde seems like a great film to me, in spite of all the blood at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And same with Silence of the Lambs. And so there's something very mysterious at work there. If I really believe in the ideas and the emotions and the truth of the artistic vision, it can be as gruesome as Odysseus blinding Polyphemus after Polyphemus has devoured half of his crew and then vomited them up again. And that's pretty gross. I mean, I believe in Homer, and I believe in Arthur Penn as a director. And as soon as I remember the name of the guy who directed Silence of the Lambs, well, I think that movie has resonance and power. So I don't regard it as part of the sickness of our culture the way I regard an awful lot of these slasher movies.
I can't think of a specific movie offhand, but there's sort of a type of B-type movie where there's a lot of shooting, people get blown away, and you can just kind of see that the director is reveling in the fact that he can have these little exploding things make blood fly out of somebody's body, or else he can have a decapitated person or something like that, and zoom in on it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm not talking about the movies that are deliberately exploitative of horror, like the Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Street kind of movies, because you know what you're getting when you go into one of those. But it's sort of a kind of middle thing where the director isn't all that good and the story isn't all that good, and you're just awash with blood, from. Then there's borderline movies. Like I think one of the best gangster movies I've seen this year is Goodfellas.
Oh yeah.
And there are times when I feel like they're really exploiting. They're really pushing my buttons. Some of the violence in that is just. I mean, it's accurate though. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that went on. But they really kind of the movie really kind of dwells on it. It really grosses you out. So it's kind of a borderline. For me, it's kind of a borderline.
It is an excellent depiction of the sensation of being on way too much cocaine.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's
very
the
good
editing.
job of
Yeah.
showing the kind of jerks people become.
That whole that whole last part where he's doing cocaine, I think it's the editing of the movie. They sort of each little piece is sort of speeded up, and it's very choppy, and you go from situation to situation very fast, and it all gives you that feeling of being.
Somebody asked Tim Leary about cocaine once, and Tim said some people are just born loud, obnoxious assholes. Others have to discover cocaine to get that way.
Well, I started. I started writing. I didn't really start out to be a writer. I started out to be a comic strip. I wanted to create a comic strip. When I was, I really loved. But I never knew that about Bob. Bob was talking about the fact that he made model dinosaurs. And I made model dinosaurs too.
I also did comic books.
And comic books, yeah. I did all my comic books were imitation Buck Rogers comic books. I was born in 1933, and I think practically the first thing I learned to read outside of the grammar school Dick and Jane book that we had was Buck Rogers. I have this vivid memory of the early Buck Rogers, which appeared in New York City in the Saturday New York Journal American, and it was a full page. They used to. That's the terrible thing about comic strips. They've shrunk over. Now there's no such thing as a whole page of a newspaper devoted to a single color comic strip, and those things were really works of art. So I started out doing those things, and I would. When I was about 11 years old, I was doing a comic strip on a small sheet of paper and using carbon paper to make multiple copies of it, and then going around from door to door in the apartment house where I lived, selling this for a penny a copy. And I think even at child labor rates, they would really get anybody who bought one of my comic strips. They were hand colored. With crayons, and I used both sides of the paper too. So they were getting an awful lot for their penny. Anybody who bought it, but it's still pretty hard to sell, and pretty hard to get people interested. And then I guess I made the terrible mistake of thinking that writing is easier than being a commercial artist or a cartoonist, because you don't need any formal training to be a writer, whereas if you want to be I was still kind of torn when I was in college. In fact, I really didn't know what I wanted to be until my analyst told me when I was about 40 that what I had been all my life was a writer, and I should probably it was probably too late to change careers at this point, and so I should probably continue doing that. But anyway, I got this. I went to a school in New York City called Cartoonists and Illustrators School, and I did that for a semester. And I guess college was when I discovered that you didn't really have to work your ass off to get people to approve of you, which is kind of something that I was raised to believe. And I began to slack. I discovered Slack.
Even before Bob?
Yes. Oh well, I mean, all these revelations go back. I was thinking when that panel was on that every religion, no matter how recently it was started, actually goes back to the very beginning of creation. I have a friend who was an Episcopalian who was taking religious instruction, and the Episcopal priest who was teaching the class said, who was the founder of our religion? And of course they all said Henry VIII. And he said, no, Jesus Christ. So, Anyway, so I went to this cartoonist and illustrator school. I discovered slack, and I decided to miss classes. And pretty soon I was doing that as kind of a night thing. And during the day, I was going to a regular college, and writing just sort of started to seem easier. Once I learned how to touch type, everything else was downhill. Something occurred.
I'd like to hear your experiences with Buddhism, how that affected you from before you studied it and after. What difference it made?
Well, I first got interested in Buddhism with, and this was, 1959, and I think that's when Buddhism started to become kind of popular in the United States. There had been various movements before that, but 1959, Ray Bradbury, I think I mentioned, if you were there yesterday, I mentioned that he wrote an article in the Writer magazine called Zen and the Art of Writing. And let's see, I was in graduate school at that time. I had been in the Army, and I got out of the Army, and I was in graduate school, and I guess I'd heard a little bit about Zen and Buddhism before that, but I was kind of struggling with the idea of trying to write fiction and to be prolific enough to maybe make a living doing this. I had decided that graduate school, I was studying English literature in graduate school, and I had decided that this was kind of a great bore, and I didn't want to. And I think that was probably me, because the study of English literature is not intrinsically boring. But anyway, that was my reaction to it, or to the way it was taught there. And it was a great revelation to me, because he came up with this work, relax, don't think kind of formulation. And he mentioned Eugen Herrigel's Zen and the Art of Archery. And so I read that. And the idea that I got from both of these things was that a lot of my problems with writing, tend to be that I was crushed every time I got a rejection. And all the time that I was in this graduate school, this is after I got out of the Army, I was really pretty seriously trying to sell stories to magazines. And I was doing about a story a week, short stories. And I had three different general markets that I was writing for. I was trying to write stories for what we called euphemistically the slick men's magazines, which meant girly magazines like Playboy, and then all the way down to magazines called things like Nugget and High Life. So I was trying to write for that market. Then I was trying to write science fiction. And I also was trying to write literary stories for literary magazines and sending them off to places like the Kenyon Review and the Sewanee Review. And sometimes I had my list, you start at the top of your list.
Right.
This is the best paying market, so you send it there first. So like all my men's magazine stories went to Playboy. And I remember another graduate student, and I collaborated on a story for Playboy, which we called Scarlet Panties. It was not successful. It did not succeed. But we put a lot of work into it. We didn't understand that Playboy. The whole thing was, in order to really write for Playboy, you had to know what the heck they were into that month.
Yeah.
Which meant you actually had to be there in Chicago and drinking and talking with the editorial staff, because they always had a different idea of what they were doing. And I think the time that I was writing, I thought, well, what they want is they want pornography, kind of classy pornography with long sentences. And I remember my collaborator said, ellipses. And I said, what? And he said, ellipses. If you study Playboy carefully, you will discover that all the articles in Playboy and all of the editorial writing and everything else is full of ellipses. So we have to write an elliptical style. So we wrote this elliptical pornographic story called Scarlet Panties, which went nowhere.
I was just going to say, that's the benefit of collaboration. When it fails, you can always blame the other guy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely his fault. He went on to become a performance artist. That was the last I heard of him. He was living in New York City, and he was a performance artist. So we both escaped anyway from academia. I haven't forgotten your question.
Everybody else has.
Buddhism.
Oh, Buddhism.
Buddhism.
Yes, yes.
So
No, I've got scarlet panties.
you just can't get away from that.
Yeah. Now I've lost track of Buddhism.
Actually, Bob, that was the high point of my literary career. But after that, during that time that I was writing these stories, every time I would get, I had the method down pretty good. You got to write, you got to send it out, you got to keep sending it out until somebody buys it. But my problem was a certain just basic insecurity in my character that would not allow me to. I was just simply not optimistic enough to do that. And I have friends, who are even much worse at this than I am. But I mean, I would bounce back. But I had one friend who wrote poems for years and years and years, and she finally submitted them all to Poetry Magazine. And they turned him down, and not for any, not because they said they were bad poems or anything, but she's been so crushed by that she hasn't contributed and has submitted anything to any magazine since then.
Well, you haven't gotten back to Buddhism yet.
Oh, this is all about Buddhism.
When you meet scarlet panties on the road, kill them.
No, like the main. One of the main symbols, no, I don't know if it's a main symbol, but in Japan they have these dolls which are called Daruma dolls. And Daruma is the Japanese name for Bodhidharma, and Bodhidharma is kind of the founder of the patriarch of Zen Buddhism, the Indian monk who came from India to China and introduced. And his ideas then, when they got together with Taoism in China, kind of led to what we know as Zen Buddhism. And these Daruma dolls always they're weighted and they have a rounded bottom. And the way you know Bodhidharma is that, or Daruma, is that he has huge eyes, great big eyes that just fix you. And the reason he has those eyes is because when he was meditating, he found that he had a tendency to fall asleep. And so he cut off his eyelids in order to keep his eyes open, and he threw them on the ground, and from his eyelids sprang the tea plant, which ever since then Zen monks have used to keep themselves awake when they're trying to meditate. Do you all believe that? Good, okay. Okay, the Daruma doll has this rounded bottom, and when you push it over, of course, it bounces back right away. And this then is a kind of a Zen principle. You get pushed over, you bounce back. It's no problem. Nothing is a problem, really. Nothing finally destroys you. Nothing finally crushes you. You can't be crushed. Because you as you don't exist, really. At any rate, Ray Bradbury, I think, knew only that much more about Zen than I did when he wrote that article. But he wrote it so beautifully, and it was so exciting that. And I said, what I saw was that my problem, as I said, was that every time I got a rejection slip, every time I got an article back, I thought, God, I'm just no good. I don't know how to write. And I've got to go back to square one and learn how to write short stories, because obviously I'm doing something wrong. Well, I wasn't doing anything wrong. It's just that it takes a long time. A lot of people are sending in stories, and it takes a long time to get to the point where people are buying your material regularly. And the more you produce, and the more you don't worry about how you're doing it and what you're doing, and are you using the right method, and how's your story structure and all that kind of stuff. The more you don't worry about that kind of stuff and just keep cranking it out repetitiously week after week, the sooner probably you will succeed as a writer. And this was the message I got from Zen and the Art of Writing. The way Bradbury put it was work, be prolific, be productive. Quantity, in a sufficient quantity, will lead to quality. Relax, meaning that when you're in the habit of working and you're not self-critical and you don't have that inner tension, that is, I mean, I know that for me, this is really the thing that kind of stops me, that always slows me down when I'm writing. I come up with a sentence and I think, oh, that's a shitty sentence. Boy, oh, that's a cliche. I can't write that. Now let me see. How can I recast it? And I sit there and I stare at the screen, and then after a little while I forget what I was thinking about, and then I start looking out the window, and then after about 10 minutes of that, I mean, this goes on today, but back in 1959 it was yellow paper and a little portable typewriter, looking out the window, and God, I'm not writing anything here, and this is just not a good day, and so the relaxation involved is getting away from that kind of inner tension that inhibits one's flow of thought and creativity, and just going with it. And the don't think part, as I interpreted it, meant you can't write. You have to think when you're writing. I mean, that's basically what writing is all about, is thinking and then putting the thoughts on paper in some form. So I discovered so what I decided he meant was don't think critically. Don't second. In other words, don't second guess yourself. So I then started reading. I read whatever books by Alan Watts were available at the time, and the more I read, the more I was attracted to this. And I read some Aldous Huxley, Alan Watts, Eugen Herrigel, and there wasn't much more that was around, I think, at that time. And it didn't really, I can't say it really took. I was attracted to it, but I didn't really know what I could do with that. And it was so that was the beginning, but it was a long process. For one thing, at the time, I was until I was in my
camel.
Was it its nose? Was it a camel's nose?
It looked like a camel.
Well, don't let any more of the, don't let the nose in, and the rest of the camel will follow. I was a practicing Orthodox Catholic, and when I buy into a belief system, I really seem to buy into it 100%. So at that time, that's what I believed in. So I really couldn't kind of reconcile that with Buddhism, So Buddhism had to be sort of an academic pursuit. I couldn't allow myself to become. Other Catholics did not have this kind of problem, like Thomas Merton, for example, had Dom Aylred Graham and people like that, seemed to find. And the nice thing about Zen is that it is pretty adaptable. It allows you to. It can be. Buddhism and particularly Zen are so undogmatic that they allow themselves to be transferred pretty easily, and you can hold you can have other philosophical beliefs and so on. Of course, it raises some, with Zen, that raises some question about the value and validity of being attached to various other dogmas or teachings or moral codes or what have you. But I think the thing that attracted me to it was that you just go, you just do, you just act, you do it. It was the whole idea of getting away from being self-critical and ratiocination and all of those things that if you're at all intellectual, if you have the curse of the open mind, which I know I do. I mean, I'm the kind of guy, if somebody comes in and robs my apartment, I think, now, I wonder why he did that. I wonder what his problem was, that he needed money. That he had to take all my stuff. And I always have this problem psyching myself up to get mad and do something about, So naturally, then the result is that I admire people who are people of immediate and decisive action. People like the samurai, and when I read about the samurai, and so many of the samurai, when Zen came to Japan, it's very hard, and I still really don't feel like I haven't figured out how a religion that teaches nonviolence and ahimsa, I think was the original word, harmlessness, could be the favorite religion for so many of the Japanese samurai, except that conceivably it was a matter of a code. That is, you don't go around chopping just anybody's head off, but if you're really a good warrior, you restrict yourself to practicing and competing with other warriors. One of my favorite movies is, have you all seen the Samurai trilogy? Anybody seen that? It stars Toshiro Mifune as probably the greatest Japanese swordsman, a man named Miyamoto Musashi. And Musashi was fascinating because he was a sort of Leonardo da Vinci of samurai. He wrote poetry, he wrote philosophy, he was a sculptor, he was a painter, and he was also head and shoulders above any other samurai of his time. And this was a time after the Tokugawa took over in Japan, and the samurai no longer really had much of a function because the entire country had been pacified by the Tokugawa shogunate, and that was the period when Japan was isolated from about 1600 down to the 1850s, when the United States acted out its karma, having by that time destroyed the Indians. It was our turn, and it was our karmic destiny to open up Japan, to encourage Japan to come out into the world and participate in the 19th and 20th century world. And we're still paying the price for that. So anyway, but Musashi, he was so good, this guy, that he there's one scene where he's in an inn and he's eating rice, and there are flies in the rice, or there are flies flying around the rice, and these low-life types are creeping up on him because they don't know who he is, but they figure they're going to beat him up and take his money. And he's sitting there with chopsticks eating the rice, and then these flies start bothering him, so he starts plucking the flies right out of the air with the chopsticks. And all those people who were going to attack him creep away again. But I guess the reason why I mention this is that throughout the three movies, there is another, while he is kind of establishing his reputation as the greatest swordsman in Japan, and of course he's taught by a monk, he learns everything. He's not taught how to fight by a monk, but his whole philosophy comes from this monk, and the monk starts his teaching by trapping Musashi and hauling him up with a rope around his waist, hauling him up to the top of a tree, and just leaving him dangling there for a couple of days until he finally promises. Musashi at this point is kind of a wild man, and the monk sort of tames him and says, all right, if I let you down and you listen to what I have to say, then I'll feed you, and so on. So this other fellow, Sasaki, is like the second, well, we don't know it at this point. One of these guys is the greatest swordsman of all time. And so samurai simply wandered around the country competing with one another because there wasn't anything else for them to do. And so when Musashi and Sasaki, that by the third movie, these movies, you can watch them all in one night, and each one is about 90 minutes long. First one is about his early life, and then the second one is sort of the middle stages when he builds his reputation. And the third one, he and his rival meet on this island, and it's under the sponsorship of a local daimyo or landlord, and they fight. And the fight lasts about 10 seconds. And Sasaki is standing there smiling when it's all over, and then he just keels over because something that happened so fast that you can't even see it has happened, and Sasaki is defeated. And Musashi gets into this boat. He's rowed across by this old, naturally a philosophical old boatman, and he's going back to this. Toshiro Mifune is such a wonderful actor, and he's just sitting in the boat weeping his head off, sobbing, and just crying his head off because he's killed this other guy. And so there is some kind of connection between not only Buddhism teach or Zen teach the idea of not getting in between, not allowing thought to get in the way of action, but as I say, the samurai somehow they managed to reconcile the fact that what they did was go around killing people with their Buddhism, and it somehow worked together. So the thing this is the thing that attracted me, but it was only later. Then I went through. By the '60s, I had started a kind of break, my own kind of philosophical break with the Catholic Church, and I don't know if any of you ever remember Monsignor Fulton J. Sheen, who used to.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I saw him and Bela Lugosi at the same time.
That's right. Well, Monsignor Sheen had certain signs about him. One was that his eyebrows grew straight across like this. But I remember we used to, my mother used to put him on religiously every Sunday night. And this is radio I'm talking about. I guess he by the time he was Bishop Sheen, he became a star of TV, of religious TV. He was an early televangelist. And to his great credit, I think, before his death, he was a very outspoken opponent of the Vietnam War. And I think since he generally tended to be a pretty orthodox guy, if I'm going to talk about it, I should mention the fact that do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, how he became a kind of a major anti-war figure. But he was pretty orthodox, and one of the things that he said that really stuck with me when I was listening to him sort of perforce as a kid was, no Catholic has ever left the Catholic Church because of philosophical differences. It's always because they can't live up to the moral code of the Church. And this is particularly true in the area of sex. I don't know if he said sex right out there in the radio, but he was talking about divorce, the fact that Catholics can't remarry if they get a divorce, and birth control and those issues. And that's true. And that's why I left the Catholic Church, because I could no longer live up to its moral code. But he's right. But he thought there was something reprehensible about that. I mean, his point was that it shows you're really a person of poor character, and you're really just a bad person, and that's why you leave the church, not because you've reasoned your way out of it. So I started off with reasoning that a lot of the things that I was doing, I had married, and my marriage ended in divorce, and it was a regular Catholic marriage and everything else, and it lasted just a very short time, and it was a big mistake for both of us. And I thought, then I'm going to have to, if I want to stay a good Catholic, I am going to have to spend the rest of my life celibate. I hadn't really been celibate up to that point, but I thought, well, anyway, I'm not going to be able to get married again, or if I do get married, it's not going to be the real thing. I mean, God really isn't going to approve of it. So I thought, that's crazy. It doesn't make any sense at all. And then I was fortunate enough to meet a woman with whom I began an affair shortly after my marriage broke up. And I thought, gee, this is all, according to the church, this is wrong. This is bad. This poor woman here is an adulteress, and I'm dragging her into this whole thing. So I thought, well, that's crazy too. What we're doing is very good. I cannot feel bad about this. I cannot feel guilty. I can't feel wrong about it. Oh, and of course we were practicing birth control. I mean, this lady and I were practicing birth control because so we had the additional sin. So I began. Well, is that? Oh, should I be siring children here in this convoluted situation? So that basically is where that led to my breaking with the church, and one of the things that I found myself turning to at that point was turning back to my old interest in Buddhism and starting to read about it again, and starting to, in fact, and that was what I'm talking about now. This was 1965, 66, which was really the beginning of the era, the decade that we call the 60s. As the 60s didn't begin in 1960. But, well, some of the threads began there, but it really kind of got going around 1966, I would say. And one of the big things was that Zen people started popping up all over the place. And I didn't actually get the opportunity to meet and work with any Zen teachers then, but the literature expanded tremendously. And Alan Watts was writing a lot of stuff at that time, and it was very influential, articles and books and so on. And I have to, Orthodox Zen people have a tendency to put down Alan Watts, which I think is very unfortunate. I think that they do it on the grounds, people say, well, he never really had a satori, but I think that in his own way he was, I met him a couple of times, so I'm not talking just from what I think about him based on his books. I think that he was in his way a very illuminated person, and that he certainly was able to take very, very philosophical ideas that are very, very difficult for people trained in Western thinking to understand, and make them understandable, and sometimes only momentarily. I mean, you would read a book by Alan Watts, and for about an hour afterwards you would go around thinking you finally got it, and then it would kind of fade out again, and sometimes even if you reread the book, it wouldn't be enough. But anyway, it kind of gave you the idea that there was something else out there was another way of looking at things. And I really think I keep all of his books on my shelf now, and I refer to them from time to time, and I really think that he's still one of the best teachers in this area, one of the best writers in this area that I know of. Yes.
Actually, there is no Zen orthodoxy. They don't have a pope, so nobody can declare who's orthodox and who isn't. So the so-called Zen orthodoxy are a bunch of assholes who claim to be the Zen orthodoxy. The Northern California Buddhist community under Baker Roshi gave Alan the burial of a Buddhist saint. Even though they knew he was an alcoholic, but they said he was still a Buddhist saint in his own way. Of course, Baker Roshi got thrown out himself shortly thereafter for having an affair with a married woman.
Excuse me, that was Aitken Roshi.
Baker Roshi.
Well, Baker Roshi?
Yeah.
Okay, well, who's Aitken Roshi then?
I think he's
Robert
replaced Baker Roshi.
And
Baker Roshi went to Arizona.
Okay, all right, I got him mixed up. Thank you. I've got him mixed up, and I always get him mixed up. And in fact, for a while, I don't know if those of you who were here this morning, and I was talking about that statement about if it turned out that all the writings of that was supposed to be, all the Buddhist scriptures turned out to be written by some starving graduate student back in the 19th century, they'd still be valuable. I used to go around attributing that to Robert Bly. And then I found out, no, it wasn't Robert Bly who said that. Now, I'm pretty sure it was Robert Aitken. What about Baker? What's his first name?
I forgot. He's been
I think
Baker
he's a Robert,
Roshi
too.
for so long. I forgot what his Christian.
Anyway, I got him. We do have a tendency to get all these Roberts and Bobs mixed up. And so I got Robert Bly mixed up with Robert Aitken. And now I think it's Robert Aitken who made the statement about Buddhist scriptures, fake Buddhist scriptures being okay. But I also think it's Robert Aitken who got involved with his parishioners' wives.
No, that was Baker.
And was driven out of the...
That was Baker, because I remember a long conversation.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to get this all sorted out when I go back home, and maybe I can find in my files or whatever, I can find attribute the right things to the right people. Hawking, right, the guy who does the gardening catalog, isn't he the guy who was responsible for, or isn't he the guy whose wife was having...
Paul Hawken.
Paul Hawken, yeah, I think he's the guy who was in that community and who drove Baker out.
Yeah, well, I don't know who he was because Baker, I just heard Baker's side of it.
Uh-huh.
He said the husband had a lot of bad karma to burn off. He tried to get rid of it by writing poison pen letters about where he's Zen Center in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a period back in the late '80s, I think, when a lot of Zen centers were hit with scandals. It wasn't just that one, but there were other Zen centers around the country. And my own, ultimately, I sort of wound up. I don't consider myself I don't consider myself in any way an authority on Zen or even a member. I'm not even a member of any organized Zen group. I mean, it's just like I take what I like from their philosophy, and that's it. You know, after you've been a Catholic, you get kind of leery, and I use the word intentionally.
Right.
You get kind of leery about committing yourself to any kind of organization or any authority.
Right.
Well, you either do that or you go in the other direction and you look for another church to join. And in my case, I have been sort of frightened. I've been thoroughly frightened by churches, and right now I'm very much involved with Al-Anon, and I really like them. One of the things I like about them is they're a pretty undogmatic bunch of people. I mention this because, I don't know if you all know what Al-Anon is. It's if anyone doesn't, it's a spin-off of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's a 12-step organization. It's based on the 12 steps, and it is for people who are somehow involved with an alcoholic. And I have my alcoholic's permission to state publicly that I'm an Al-Anon, because the anonymity in Al-Anon is there to protect the alcoholics. See, if somebody says they're an Al-Anon, then right away, well, you know that somebody in their family must be an alcoholic. So normally you don't come out and say you're an Al-Anon. But it is a very they speak of a higher power, but there's absolutely the higher power can be anything. I've heard at one Al-Anon meeting, I heard a person talk about a woman said that her higher power. I live on the shores of Lake Michigan, and this woman said her higher power was Lake Michigan. When she and I think in this circle, nobody's going to look askance at that. When she needs advice, or she needs guidance, or she needs to get strength, she goes and confers with Lake Michigan. I guess if anything, after my 1960s deconversion, the debriefing from Catholicism, if anything, I kind of turned to the church of fundamentalist materialism. At that point, I decided I couldn't believe in anything supernatural, or I couldn't believe in anything that was not. If I couldn't touch it, I decided that the whole thing. The Catholics are taught that Saint Thomas, the original saint, that the apostle. They were always taught that he was kind of a flawed person because he wouldn't believe that Jesus was resurrected until he actually met him and checked out the wounds and said, "Yeah, I guess this is you, all right." And I always thought, yeah, that's the way I feel about these things. When I was a little kid, I swear to God, this is true. I started disbelieving in the non-existence of God. No, I didn't. No, I started doubting the existence of God, which really terrified me, because I knew that it meant I would go to hell. And I started actually tossing coins and saying, if there's a God, make it come up heads. Oh, well, best 2 out of 3. And I actually remember doing that as an experiment one time when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I didn't get anywhere, didn't learn anything, and didn't come to any conclusion from that.
We've got so much in common, doing comic books before writing and all the other things. I didn't try the coin thing. I tried going where no adult could hear me. I found an empty lot, and I stood there and said, "I don't believe in God, I don't believe in God," and waited to see what would happen, and nothing happened. But that didn't cure me. I went back to school, and the nuns went to work on my head again. I was about 7. It was only when I was 14 and out of Catholic school I really got loose. But I remember trying that experiment, really scared that lightning would come down, but I just wanted to see if it would work, and it didn't.
Well, I went to a Catholic grammar school, a Catholic high school run by the Christian Brothers, and a Catholic college run also by the Christian Brothers. And like a lot of people send their kids to Catholic schools because you get a good education. I really did get a terrific education, particularly at Manhattan College. They had a great liberal arts program there at the time, and it was unlike any. The only thing comparable to what they were doing when I went there was the liberal arts was the program at St. John's College in Annapolis, and the similar program that Robert Hutchins and Mortimer Adler ran at the University of Chicago for a while. But this was not a great books program. It was not, the St. John's Annapolis, you read what are considered to be the great books, and when you get out the other end, supposedly you have subsumed all of the knowledge of Western civilization, which from our point of view today seems like a kind of a naive operation. But it's not a bad program in the sense that you do read a book, and the book is probably a pretty important book, and you do really chew over it, discuss it, and get to know it pretty well. And that can't hurt. The program that we had at Manhattan College was what they called an integrated liberal arts program, so that there were no electives in freshman and sophomore year. And you studied everything in chronological order, so that at the same time that you were studying in your history course, you were studying ancient history. In your philosophy course, you would be studying the pre-Socratic philosophers and then the Greek philosophers. And you'd had a fine arts course where you were studying first ancient. Everything was Western. And I have to say to my grade, but my point is that I did come out of there. I had to do a lot of work on my own after that to learn about a lot of other stuff that I didn't get to learn about in college. But it did give me a terrific framework, a structure to hang things on, a sense of, and I give them a lot of credit for that. I must also give myself some credit for going to various teachers and demanding to know why we didn't study Asian history and Asian philosophy and all of those things, which I thought was equally interesting and important. Of course, the answer was we don't have time, And besides, this is your roots, I mean, your roots have nothing to do with China or Japan or whatever, and you got to learn about that before you can learn about anything else, and that is not a totally unreasonable position to take, but still, I'm glad that I knew enough to at least raise the question. So I guess there really isn't much more to tell about my interest in Buddhism, but you see, that's the thread on which I've been hanging all of this for the last 10 or 15 minutes.
I read the 12 steps, and they're very Taoist. I noticed.
Uh-huh.
12 steps are very Zen.
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, about letting things be and accepting,
Yes.
accepting who you are, and it seems to
Mm-hmm.
be like the Taoist is be centered.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's this whole feeling now that it's a tricky business just how far you should go accepting things. I mean,
right.
Surely accepting things doesn't mean being a doormat,
Right.
And surely that's not what we were put into this world to do. But there's another sense in which maybe the accepting is like when the Daruma doll gets pushed over. He goes over very easily, but then he bounces right back up again. Maybe that's what it's all about. I know a Muslim, I don't know if this is really all that relevant, but anyway, I read a Muslim teaching, which is that we should be passive towards God and active towards the world. And that's kind of a nice way to put it. So whatever God throws at you, you take, but then you turn around and you do whatever it is you feel you should be doing. But you're right about that. And I see a kind of another big influence on me going back to college with the Stoic philosophers. And they of course teach that if you really want to be happy, you should want what you got.
Right, yeah.
Of course.
Pardon?
Of course.
Yeah, and that's again the idea of acceptance, and you definitely do find that in the same thing in Buddhist teachings, and I feel a great kinship, and in fact, some people have said there is some anthropological evidence that there's a connection that between Buddhist ideas and Stoical ideas. One, I don't know which fertilized which, but that you know anything about that?
Well, I know one thing. Joseph Needham, in his book Science and Civilization in China, mentions there was a Buddhist monk in Athens around the time of Plato. And there was another Buddhist monk arrived in Rome at the time of Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
So there were contacts, at least two.
Yeah, and it wouldn't take much, really. It just takes a few people to transmit an idea from one place to another.
Oh, and then there was Apollonius of Tyana, who went all over the Mediterranean teaching. He spent a couple of years in India studying there.
Was he a Stoic?
No, but he brought back
But he
ideas
brought back
from
ideas
India
from there. Yeah.
to the Mediterranean world.
Right. The thing that always attracted me to Zen, I think, is that I guess it is its very transportability. It's such, and like Stoicism, it's kind of a no-frills philosophy. You don't have to. There isn't a whole lot of baggage or gingerbread with it. You know, there isn't a whole lot of stuff you have to believe, and that's good because I still do have this very strong skeptical streak in me, and you can be a skeptic and confront Zen, and there's very little you can be skeptical about. There's very little in it that a hard-headed skeptic can attack.
Arthur Kessler tried.
Yeah, Arthur Kessler. He is a funny man. He was a funny man. It was probably one of the most intelligent and well-educated, well-informed people in the Western world in his time, and a wonderful writer, and so wrong-headed. Well, Bob Wilson has told me the story. That's where I learned that Kessler, when I guess he was in his Marxist period, and he went to Russia to see how the great new society was working out after the Bolshevik Revolution. He spent the entire time washing his hands over and over and over again. And he is also said to be the only person who had a bad trip with Timothy Leary. With Timothy Leary as his guide, right?
Yes.
And I mean, this man was really, whatever the problems of whatever problems in one's thinking Western philosophy creates, he was sort of the archetype of these problems. He wrote a book called The Lotus and the Robot, which was supposed to, I think it came out around the time that there have been so many waves of Asian philosophy coming to the West and people being influenced by it. I mean, you could go back to Voltaire's day, and they were beginning to take an interest in Asian ideas. But I guess this was the 50s. There was a wave of popularization of Asian ideas that was coming in, both Hinduism and Buddhism. And Kessler went to India, and he went to Japan, and it's pretty clear he went there just the way the amazing Randy goes someplace to prove that some paranormal phenomenon is a fake. Kessler went to India and Japan to prove that all this attractiveness of Hinduism and Buddhism was ridiculous, and these people have nothing to teach us in the West, and we really are way ahead of them, and we should forget this stuff. And my two favorite things are his description of the rock garden at the Ryoanji Temple with the the big expanse of white pebbles with the big black rocks in it. And all he could talk about was the fact that there was a loudspeaker in the background saying things in Japanese about what a beautiful garden this was. And as far as he was concerned, that and the fact that it was nothing but a bunch of rocks and pebbles pretty much proved that if people thought this was sublime, then there was clearly something wrong with them. And the other thing was he looked into this whole business about Zen archery, and he said, yes, this is a much touted idea, he said, but if you actually look at the record of the Japanese archery team at the Olympics in such and such a year, you'll find that they did very poorly. So much for Zen.
Yeah.
Yeah, which completely misses the target. But it was really fascinating. I read and reread Arthur Koestler's book, and as I say, he's a person who had a lot of very, very interesting ideas on his own, and was not to be dismissed lightly. But he sure had all of the Western hang-ups. So what I've been doing, I have been. Around 1974, I guess, I decided to really start. I said this stuff. Up until now, my interest in Buddhism has been entirely academic and intellectual. I have read a lot about it. I've talked to people about it, and I've learned as much as I can. Not as much as I can, but as much as I need to know. And I've really got to start. I mean, if this stuff is going to mean anything at all, I've got to start practicing it somehow. And so I read some more books. I should tell you, I am probably, talk about books, I'm probably one of the people who is more influenced by books I'm more influenced by books than anybody I know. I get all of my ideas out of books. I learned about sex from a book. When I was about 12 years old, my mother decided, and I should say that my father died when I was 1, and I was raised entirely by my mother, who was a saint. And I mean, I really believe that the stuff that she put up with was incredible. But she decided that and this is an example of what a good person she was. She didn't just leave my sex education to chance, but she got a book and she started reading to me from this book. The only thing was she had her own notion of the pace at which I should learn. And I remember I looked over her shoulder at one point and I said, what's masturbation? And she started laughing and closed the book. So I think about a month later, I found out where she kept it hidden. And the rest is history. So all my life, I mean, when I have wanted to learn about anything, I read a book when I was a little later and I started older and I started dating. I read a book on the art of kissing. And, before I attempted to kiss anybody, I thought I should read a book on it. And so later, I read some books on meditation, and that was how I learned the art of Zen meditation. And I started practicing it on a regular basis in 1974. And I think one of the books at that time that was pretty influential for me was Philip Kaplow's Three Pillars of Zen. And then, not long after that, I discovered I've been living since 1974. I've been living in Glencoe, which is a little suburb of Illinois, of Chicago, on Lake Michigan. It's about 5 suburbs up from the city. And in Evanston, which is directly north of the city, there is a Zen Center of Chicago. And I found out about them because I was just wandering around beautiful downtown Glencoe, which consists of like one block of shops. And there was a sign in the shop window saying that Roshi Philip Kaplow would be giving a workshop at the Zen Center. And so I went down there, and then I started going to this center regularly. And so my actual direct contact with Zen people has been through this Zen Center of Chicago, which is connected with the one in Rochester, New York, which was founded by Philip Kaplow, who's a really interesting guy. I've spoken to him I've exchanged about 2 sentences with him. As a matter of fact, he wrote his last book. He's living in retirement in New Mexico now, and he founded like this whole kind of series of Zen communities around the country, and they seem to be doing pretty well. And they're not. It's not a heavy trip. it's a place where you can go and you can meditate, and they have a beautiful zendo, or room to sit in, and nobody kind of drags you in and makes you believe stuff or makes you agree to anything, and it's kind of a good, for me, it's a kind of a good organization to be on the fringes of, and you know, maybe I'll get a little bit closer into the center, but I'm still kind of in that state of once bit, twice shy, and if I join it, I still feel like I'm signing my life away. So I go there. Philip Kaplow's last book is called The Wheel of Life and Death, and it's actually mostly about the death part of the wheel. And I bought a copy of it from him the last time he was at the Zen Center, and the inscription is, for Bob Shea, may you live a long time and have a happy death. Philip Kaplow. I showed that to my son, and he said, "Oh God, that's creepy." You know? But I didn't think so. I thought that was very good. I like that. So that's what I'm currently doing, is meditating. I learned masturbating and meditating, both from books.
That's all you need to know.
That's right. One becomes completely self-sufficient. Yeah, so I learned. I've been meditating at home, pretty much, and going to the Zen Center from time to time, and kind of getting my contact with real live Zen people from that, and it's been very good. And I guess the rest of my life philosophically has been involved with anarchism and libertarianism, which that sort of started off in 1968. I was kind of looking again. I was like a lot of people, I was a big, as I said, I buy into everything very deeply, and I was a big partisan of John F. Kennedy at the time that he was, when he was running. I was actually passing out leaflets and buttons and stuff like that, and taking abuse from Republicans on the streets of New York City in the fall of 1960, and I really thought that the new age had come. You know, when I saw his inaugural, I remember seeing I was in a bar watching that inaugural address and listening to it, and I loved every word of it. You know, including "Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country." You know, which is the thing that anarchists and libertarians always hate about Kennedy, and they always point to that particular statement as showing what an authoritarian, fascist statist he was. And so anyway, when he was killed, and when then subsequently when Martin Luther King was killed, and when Bobby Kennedy was killed, I mean, I didn't say, "Oh, this means the American political system sucks." I mean, it just seemed to me we had an awful lot of assassins running around mucking things up. But then after that, when I saw what happened, by this time I had pretty much decided that the Vietnam War was as bad in its way as what was going on in Germany under Hitler, and just as we all kind of felt that Germans had some kind of an obligation to try to do something about what was happening there, well, we certainly had an even bigger obligation to try to deal with what the United States was doing in Vietnam, because we had the freedom to protest, and we weren't going to be whisked off the street by secret police if we raised our voices. So therefore, it was even more incumbent on us to do something. So when '68 came along and the Democratic Convention came along, we were. I have to say, I wasn't all that militant. I mean, I ran away from, I'd kind of be in a demonstration until I saw this tear gas starting to come, and then I'd be gone. And I remember Bob Wilson and I were in a couple of those, and I think I have to say, to your credit, you stayed out in the streets a lot longer than I did.
Well, I didn't stay where the tear gas was. I just ran to some place where the tear gas wasn't, and regrouped.
Well, I ran home. Really, I remember having a real Marshall McLuhan experience. then, well, there was one particular night, I think it was a Wednesday night, that the real atrocities, the biggest atrocities against the demonstrators took place. That was the night that they were all kind of around the Conrad Hilton Hotel, which is across the street from Grant Park, and the police just kind of descended on all these people. And, in masses of police. I didn't even know Chicago had that many, and the trucks and everything, and they just beat the hell out of them with clubs and threw them into the trucks. And I was home watching this on TV. And that was, and I guess that was the night that Humphrey was nominated.
Yeah.
And I'm watching the going back and forth from these people being beaten up to the convention hall, and you're seeing Ribicoff get up to protest. You're seeing reporters actually being manhandled off the convention floor. And that was when I lost my faith in the American political system. I know it was that night watching those events. And I got to say, this is kind of like when I lost my faith in Catholicism. It isn't totally logical. I mean, you could make an argument that the American political system is strong enough and good enough to overcome these things. But at the time, I just felt this really sucks. There has got to be a better way.
I was down there running away. They never did succeed in clubbing me. I'd run and then start another group and move back slowly. And we were chanting, "The whole world is watching, the whole world is watching." Yeah. And the goddamn weather people were chanting, "Pigs eat shit." Yeah. So every time they got near us, the TV people would turn off the sound. And that was the beginning of my dislike for the weather people.
Well, I can tell you, I remember distinctly that "The Whole World is Watching" came over loud and clear on my TV set, and it gave me goose pimples. I really, so, and I didn't hear "pigs eat shit." So.
Well, of course you couldn't. Flip, flip,
right, flip, 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 pigs eat shit. Right. So, the next night, all of the respectable people of Chicago came out to demonstrate. Everybody had been so grossed out by what they saw on their TV sets. I exaggerate, but a lot of people who up until that point had not wanted to participate in demonstrations came out the next night, and all gathered in Grant Park across the street from the Conrad Hilton. And I was working for Playboy magazine at the time, and a bunch of us from the Playboy office went down there after work at 5 o'clock, and most of us, well, you were all kind of on the younger side. A lot of women were there, and I remember there was one woman, a statuesque young researcher by the name of Inga Hilton. And Inga went up to a soldier who had a big canister on his back and a hose in his hand. I should say that all of Michigan Avenue was just lined with troops, and they had jeeps, and the jeeps had barbed wire on the front, and it was pretty interesting. And Inga went up to this guy and she said, "What have you got in the canister?" And he said, "You'll find out." And we were addressed in turn by Dick Gregory. First we were addressed by Pierre Salinger, who had been President Kennedy's secretary, who was a delegate, and he kind of came over to say, "No, boys and girls, the system still works. Believe in the system." And then I know it's hard, but try. And then Jean Genet was there, and Dick Gregory was there. And by this time, everybody said, what we have to do is actually march on the convention hall. We have to all get down to where they're having the... by this time, it was, the nominations had gone on and everything, but it was still, that would be the symbolic thing to do. So I guess some National Guard general or somebody got wind of this and sent word that if you try it, we'll stop you. Because everybody knew that was what would happen. And then Dick Gregory got up and he said, "Well, it happens that I live on 18th Street, which is down that direction. And, well, maybe we can't march to the amphitheater, but you can. I'm inviting all of you to visit me at my house. And it's down the same way." So then Jean Genet got up and said something in French. And his translator was with him, and he said, "Monsieur Genet says, a black man has asked me to go south with him. How can I refuse?" So That was it, and we all started walking. And on a street corner was, oh Christ, what's his name? Not Jerry Rubin, Abbie Hoffman, right? We walked past Abbie Hoffman, and he's standing there, and I don't know why. This is one of those little splinter things, you know. We were always disagreeing with each other about what the proper tactics were. And Abbie Hoffman's standing there saying, "Don't do it, you're all a bunch of sheep." You know, and I don't know why he didn't want us to do it, but anyway, you know, we're getting abuse not from the National Guard, but from Abbie Hoffman. So we went on, we got as far as 18th Street, and there were all of the troops and trucks and cops and buses and lorries and everything else, all lined up. And were you there?
Yeah, but I didn't. They only let the march get started, then they stopped the rest of us. So I was back there in the group they wouldn't let even get started.
Oh, okay. So we got as far as, and then they said, then big voices come over bullhorns. And these were our people. We had bullhorns, or our people had bullhorns, our leaders, right? And they said, it has been arranged, we can't proceed any further, but it has been arranged that anyone who would like to be arrested can come to this side of the street and go through. There'll be barricades, but there'll be one opening, and you can step through the barricade, and you will be arrested, and you will be taken in. So anybody who wants to be arrested, just come over here. You know, it was like the whole thing was. It was a cachet. It was a thing to brag about. You know, I remember. I guess his name was Lawrence Lipton, right? Was a journalist, an underground journalist at the time. He came into the Playboy office a couple of days earlier, and he said, "I got hit by a cop. I got hit by a cop," and he wasn't complaining. You know, it was like, "Oh God, I got my, I paid my dues. I got my medal." And there was a lot of feeling like that. So this whole idea was, if you want to be arrested, then later on you can say, "Yes, I was at the Democratic Convention uprising and I was arrested." So I was kind of debating with myself whether I should get arrested or not. And I remembered that this is really stupid and paranoid, and maybe I just didn't want to get arrested. But my reasoning was, I have a small bag of marijuana in my apartment. And if they arrest me and they get my address, maybe while I'm still in jail, they'll go over to my apartment and search it, and they'll find the marijuana, and I'll, spend the next 5 years in jail. So, okay, well, I won't get arrested. So I stayed where I was with the rest of the Playboy contingent. And then I noticed a lot of young people, and I was in my 30s at this time, and by young people I mean people in their teens and 20s, all wearing plastic helmet liners, and they were starting they had canteens, and they had linen handkerchiefs, and they were taking the canteens and pouring water on the linen handkerchiefs and then putting this over their face. And they were behind me, and I said, "I think I know what's about to happen here." These people are going to rush the barricades, and then there's going to be tear gas, and we're all going to either get the shit beat out of us, or we're going to get gassed. So I turned to the other people I was with, and I said, "What would you say we go have dinner now?" So, I know a really nice restaurant, and it's only about 5 blocks up that way. So that was Johnny's Steakhouse, and on Rush Street, and so we all kind of decided that was the thing to do at that time. We went up to Johnny's Steakhouse. We sat down to have dinner. And there's a big TV set up over the bar, and there on the screen I watched all of the people where we had just been a short time earlier being beaten and gassed, and it was a weird experience. It was the only thing that I can remember that was like it was about I think it was in October. Okay, that was August of 1968. I guess it was, October of 1968. The weather people came back to Chicago, and they had a demonstration, a so-called demonstration. Actually, what they did was they just ran through the Gold Coast area of Chicago, which is where most of the affluent people live, smashing the windows of people's cars and throwing rocks at hotels. All hotels around. They're throwing rocks at hotel windows, and generally, proving that they were to be taken seriously, that their cause was just, and that they would ultimately prevail. So that night, I was having dinner with my, I think she was by then my fiancée, or at least this was the woman I later married, and her cousin and her cousin's boyfriend, and we were all going to have dinner at a really nice restaurant called, an Italian restaurant called Agostino's, which was in the Rush Street area, and we get into a cab, and we suddenly find ourselves in the middle of this weather people demonstration. They're all running around us, and they're all yelling things like, "Fuck you, motherfucker," and they're and sort of pronouncing it so clearly that you can see that they're really kind of well-educated people. They're not kind of really used to using this language, but it's politically correct. So, and the cab driver was so smart. He took us. Chicago is all the blocks of Chicago are honeycombed with alleys. So if you know where the alleys are, you don't actually have to drive through the streets to get from one place to another. You just kind of turn into an alley, you go down that alley, then you go across the street into the next alley. He took us to this restaurant that way, and it just was so funny to me because I had seen Dr. Zhivago, and here I am, and here are the four of us dining in this elegant restaurant. And outside, all of this, kind of rioting is going on. And I remembered the scene in Dr. Zhivago where Rod Steiger and who plays Lara in Dr. Zhivago? English actor, Julie Christie. Julie Christie. Rod Steiger and Julie Christie are having dinner, and all the revolution, the people in the common people in Moscow are all marching down the street under a banner, and they're singing some socialist revolutionary song, and all the people in the restaurant kind of shudder because they know this is the future going down the street. And then Rod Steiger breaks the ice by saying, perhaps after the revolution they'll sing on key. And so it was. So '68 was really an exciting time, and then I guess, does anybody have a question? I've just been rambling on.
Yeah, I know a fellow who was probably younger than you were at the time, and who was in Chicago in '68 and was very active. And not long afterward, and he studied Mao, and he was really very active. And later on, became a real estate man and leased space in shopping malls in Chicago, and told me that most of the people who were involved in all the demonstrations were it turned out to be more the way he became than the ones who ever stuck to it, and people such as myself felt that all these people betrayed us. People, though I wasn't demonstrating, I admired the people who were, and then found out that they were, a lot of them were doing it just for the fun of it because they were, happened to be out of school at the time, and it seemed to be the place to be. So I don't know how much of that demonstrating was real and how much of it was just so they can get knocked in the head and wear a badge.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't... Yeah, I don't think those are necessarily the only two choices. Because I know that most of the people I knew that I personally knew who demonstrated at all, who went out at all, went out because they thought there was some reason to, there was some justification to the demonstrating, that the war in Vietnam was wrong, and that the idea that the war was wrong was not getting any kind of a voice at the Democratic Convention. I mean, it was just not being represented. That point of view was very much the minority point of view in the organized Democratic Party. So, I think that people have mixed motives. It's not, I think that I can make, little ironic jokes about the fact that we all kind of wanted to get hit so we could say later that we got hit, but at the same time we were there out of conviction. I think that it's like any war, you know. I suppose people, it is a kind of a war, and you get involved. You get involved for a number of different reasons. And after you're involved, sometimes, you know, not all of your motivations are the most creditable. None of us, most of us, are not saints. You know, in fact, when I describe my own participation, I try to make the point that I was very ambivalent about this whole thing. You know, I didn't know if I should be there. I thought maybe I'm being a sucker. You know, like these guys like Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman and so on. You know, it's all great for them. They're making a career out of this. You know, but here I'm risking getting my head. Sure, I might get hit by a cop. I might get hit a little too hard too. You know, and get brain damage or something like that. I mean, these were real thoughts that went through my mind at the time. So you know, I certainly wasn't in the vanguard. But I don't think you would go out there if you didn't have some sense that the side you were on was the right side to be on. You know, I mean, you wouldn't just do it because, hey, it's fun, you know.
Did you ever get the feeling you were at the wrong convention, that you should have been at the Republican convention rather than...
You know...
It seemed to help get the wrong guy elected.
Absolutely right. I mean, that's, when I say you're absolutely right, I mean that those doubts stay with me to this day. I remember Bob and I worked for a guy named Nat Lehrman at Playboy, and Nat was kind of a real orthodox liberal type person. And I remember him coming, you know, I think after Nixon got elected, you know, came into me and said, well, thanks a lot. You know, you guys helped, you know, the vote was very close. He said, you guys helped elect Richard Nixon. He said, you could have worked for Humphrey.
Yeah.
You know, Humphrey had a plan to end the war. I said, well, I'm sorry, I didn't hear about it. You know?
They're tearing the wall down.
They're tearing the wall down. Oh my God! Let's get out of here before they do. Well, I thank you very, very much for your interest and attention. I really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.